Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week it's our series finale for Series 2 on space. We're doing our conclusion episode and we're going to be handing out some awards for the best films in various categories relating to space.
So yes, it's our conclusion episode of our space series. And coincidentally, yesterday was Saturday the 30th of May. And it was the day that SpaceX launched 2 NASA astronauts into space. So we seem to be bang on trend with our space series at this point then, Matt.
Yeah, it's all in the news, it's all happening. It's still a really current thing. SpaceX is a really interesting enterprise, isn't it? Because it's a completely private thing. They use NASA astronauts, didn't they? So there's interaction with the public bodies, but it shows the shift in space travel in America that is kind of now left to the private enterprises to do that because... Well, we touched on it when we looked at Apollo 13, didn't we? How the kind of public love of space exploration and space travel kind of died out after the Apollo missions.
Yeah, and also it's weird because when we were looking at Destination Moon way back when, we were also talking about private industries taking on space travel. And SpaceX is obviously run by Elon Musk. So he's now become the real life version of those characters we saw in Destination Moon.
Yeah, but weirder.
Yeah, but weirder. Way weirder. Yeah, so it seems like there's a real resurgence of space programs. I know Netflix have got a new series called Space Force, which has just started. So, yeah, it seems like a good time to be finishing our space series. Now we've got all that content for people to listen to.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA. Go SpaceX. Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
So we've looked at lots of different films and we've travelled quite a long way into space, haven't we? So in the first few episodes of this series, we focused on a lot of films that were travelling to the moon. It was really popular in early sci-fi cinema and it continued to be a trope that films would go to the moon. Stuff like Frau im Mond, way before space travel even existed. Apollo 13 that documented the actual travel to the moon. And then films like Moon, where we're kind of... years after that's all died down, we're still interested in it as a landscape. But that's not the shortest distance we travelled, is it? We have been in between the Earth and the Moon for one film. Yes,
in Gravity, we were just within the Earth's orbit, weren't we? So a little bit closer than the Moon, but still further out than you would normally be.
Yeah, and then we travelled throughout the solar system. We've gone beyond the Moon. We went to Mars in The Martian. We went all the way to the Sun itself in Sunshine. What other planets have we been to within our solar system?
So we've been to Jupiter. We went to Jupiter in Europa Report and 2010, the year we made contact. So we've been there. We also took a little trip to Saturn and way beyond that in Interstellar when they went through the wormhole just near Saturn. And where else have we been?
The Event Horizon, the ship itself was right on the edge of our solar system. It was stranded near Neptune, which is the farthest reaches of our solar system. Because we have to remember that, of course, Pluto's not a planet, even though that sounds like a new thing and it's been true for 30 years
now.
Or something. Yeah. But it still feels like a new development. That's where the Event Horizon was. We went to a distant black hole. It's unnamed in High Life, but they're powering away from the Earth at near infinite acceleration. So they're going pretty far in that one.
So we've done a little bit of research as well prior to this episode. So we worked out how further afield we actually went. So in The Wandering Earth, when they were moving to a new solar system, they were going 4.3 light years away. So that's how far they were traveling. And then in Aniara, they were going to the Lyra constellation. And how many light years was that, Matt?
That's 25 light years away, and they just slowly floated there over the course of 6 million years.
Jeez.
We looked up the Xibalba supernova, which is the star that the astronaut in the fountain is trying to get to. which we're not sure if it's a real star or not, but it's part of the Orion Nebula. So that's 1,344 light years away. So he's up in that bubble for a really long time, but it's not the furthest distance travelled. Which is the winner in that?
So that was Contact. So that was 25,000 light years away. So they travelled all the way to the centre of the Milky Way in that film, at least according to the book, which we found out during a little bit of research. But yeah, so we've gone as far afield as 25,000 light years.
It blew my mind that when we looked that up. Just the very fact that the centre of our own galaxy is 25,000 light years away, and these films did such a good job of giving a feel of that scope. Films like The Fountain and Aniara and The Wandering Earth as well, giving that scope of just how far away things are in space. And then to look up the centre of our own galaxy being 25,000 light years away, and that's just our galaxy. And it's just the distance from us to the centre. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy because we're dealing with science fiction, but then the places that are described in some of these films are actually real places. And to find out that they are X amount of distance from us, but they are somewhere that you can actually go, theoretically, yeah, it does blow my mind a bit.
It blows our minds, but you can see how for the creative geniuses that have written and directed some of these films that we looked at, you can see how it would really stoke their imagination and really fire off some wonderful stories.
And it definitely did. We've looked at some great films over this series. I've really enjoyed it. So I think now it's a good time to get stuck into our awards. So here we are again, our awards ceremony. The masses are outside. They have all their face masks on. They are staying 2 meters apart because it is a socially distanced award show.
And you're going to edit in the sound of an audience who sounds like they're all keeping 2 meters apart from each other? That's the plan?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It will sound a little bit like this.
Oh, that was quite nice, actually. That was quite good. That did sound like an audience. It's good to see them. Good to see you all. Take care. Take care. So what's our first category?
So our first category is Best Space Discovery. So let's announce the nominees.
So the first film is Contact, using wormhole travel to the centre of the universe. The second film is Explorers, those alien kids that they find at the end of the film. Third is The Stargate, of course, the Stargate itself that they unearth from the ground. Fourth is Moon, all those weird clones that we find underneath the base. And finally, it's The Martian, the growing food on Mars, getting all that poop inside.
So let's run down these nominees and talk a little bit about them so we can make our decision on who should win this award for Best Space Discovery. So starting with Contact, it's all about wormhole travel. Now, this whole concept was I really loved it. So like they had the whole little orb thing, which fell into the weird wormhole. And then suddenly Jodie Foster is she's 25,000 light years into the center of the Milky Way. So what did you think about that? Do you think this deserves an award?
It's a big one, yeah. It won't be my pick, I don't think, because it's not a big discovery, because they get, the whole point of that episode we did on that was that they get a big helping hand from outer space. And actually, it's the same thing for Explorers, isn't it? Both of these two films, for me, no big discovery here. Although Jodie Foster's team do track those signals in space with the huge radar dishes, don't they? And they put a lot of work into that. And that's the real discovery there, isn't it? The signal from space, which leads them to the wormhole travel by the end.
Yeah, and I think in both Contact and Explorers, they're deciphering stuff. They're working out what the message is. And for me, that's the discovery. They discover this signal, they discover this message, and then by looking into that, they can figure out how they can get to where these alien creatures are living.
So what about Explorers? Why did you, James, and not me, put this on the list of nominations?
I put this in mainly to wind you up, Matt. I couldn't resist, because I knew how much you loved the alien kids at the end of Explorers, and Robert Picardo doing a funny voice, and the great prosthetics that went into making those alien creatures. I thought they were great. They were just went on a joyride and stole their dad's car, and it was really funny.
It was really funny until they discovered the alien kids, and the entire film completely ran aground and just went insane.
So I'm guessing you're not going to vote for Explorers in Best Space Discovery then?
Not for me. So then we've got the Stargate, and the big discovery there is the Stargate itself. It's thousands of years old. It's buried in the sand in Egypt, I think. So they dig that out of the ground. It turns out it can generate wormholes, and then they go on this mad adventure and meet the sun god himself, Ra. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, and like I said when we did the Stargate episode, I absolutely love this film. It's so nostalgic for me. And the whole bit when they're digging up that Stargate is it's just great. It's just lots of fun, and it's a brilliant space discovery that you wouldn't expect. So after that, the next nominee was Moon. So we already knew the twist in Moon, and spoiler alert, you must have listened to our Moon episode in order to get to the conclusion episode. But in case you haven't, spoiler alert, they find out that there are clones working on the moon. And that's how this company are keeping their industry alive on the moon and what they're mining. So I loved that whole concept, and I thought this was a big space discovery. Not necessarily the kind of discovery that you might expect, but it was a really fascinating one.
I think it's the best discovery in terms of plot for these films that we've looked at this series. It's a great twist. It's played out earlier in the film than I remembered, and it was really enjoyable. It's so well plotted and it's so well written. It is a really good discovery, but I don't think it's quite a space discovery. And actually, if I can move us on to the next film, it's The Martian. I also don't think it's a big space discovery here, even though it's an incredible use of science. Mark Watney doesn't discover agriculture.
Yeah, but he discovers how to grow food on Mars, and that's like a big thing. It's a discovery in space because he's not on Earth, he's on another planet.
Yeah, and it's incredible to watch, and it's really compelling, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so who are you backing for best space discovery then, Matt?
So for all those pernickety reasons that I just gave, for me it's got to be Stargate. It's iconic, dragging that thing out of the sand. What about you?
I think I've got to go with Stargate as well, just because it is a legit space discovery. Nobody's helped them out. They figured it out. They found this alien Stargate. And like I said, they go off into another world. It's great. That, I think, should be our winner. Are we decided?
Yeah, congratulations to Stargate.
He did it.
No. That symbol isn't anywhere on the device.
All right, well, what device? Show it. What is that?
It's your Stargate.
So our second category today is the best spacecraft. So cool or interesting spacecrafts. What are our nominations for this, James?
So in the best spacecraft category, our nominees are the Aniara from Aniara, the Cannon from A Trip to the Moon, the Thunder Road, the homemade kids ship from Explorers, the Event Horizon from Event Horizon, and the Icarus II from Sunshine. So let's run through these different spacecrafts then. So starting with the Aniara, which is a big cruise liner vessel which gets stranded out in the middle of nowhere. I thought this was a great concept for a spacecraft. A luxury cruiser where it's got lots of stuff for you to do. It's got an arcade, it's got a bar, it's got a weird Mima room where you could have weird visions of Earth. It's got everything you could need in one spacecraft.
Yeah, and in terms of production, it's really interesting because it's so much of it is using real locations, real cruise ship locations, to just realistically depict what life on the Aniara would be like. And we talk a lot on this show about how we both really like quite simple, low budget sci-fi that makes a lot out of a little, and they really do that with the ship itself in Aniara, and it was really cool and fun what they did with that.
Yeah, because all of those elements add to that sense of realism on the spacecraft, so you really feel like it could be an actual ship that you could go and board and it could take you into space.
Yeah, so what about a ship that probably couldn't take you into space? The cannon that just shoots them out of a big gun to the moon in George Méliès's A Trip to the Moon.
Yeah, this one's great. It's iconic, isn't it? It's the massive gun and the shell which gets blasted into the moon's face. It's a brilliant bit of iconography, isn't it?
Yeah, and I was being glib just then. We really enjoyed it. And it was cool that they did kind of get it right. It is just a cannon that launches a shell to the moon. It's more complicated than that in real life, but the basics of it are the same. It's just a big explosion that propels you towards the moon. They got it right in like the early 1900s or whenever Méliès made that film.
Yeah, and we saw how right they got it when we watched Destination Moon, and then Woody Woodpecker described the exact reason why something like that would work.
Yeah, he's blasting himself around with a shotgun, though, which wasn't the plan in the end in Destination Moon, because it would have been mad.
The next one as well, The Thunder Road from Explorers. This one was great. It's just a bunch of kids making this crazy ship, which turns out actually works and will get them out into space.
Yeah, and this is the part of this film that I absolutely loved before the wheels came off. Well, literally, when the ship's not really holding together that well. It's so imaginative, it's so creative, it's so childlike and lovely and sweet, and it's like building a spacecraft out of Lego, and then the kids are able to launch their Lego spacecraft into space. It's really cool. It really captured the best parts of that film. Now, the next two are quite similar, actually. They're both spindly, cool-looking ships. We've got the Event Horizon from Event Horizon. From what I remember of rewatching that was one of the best parts of rewatching the film, was how good the model work was. If it was model work, I'm not actually sure if it was a CGI thing or a model, but it looks super cool. It's kind of long and jagged and iconic in its own way, isn't it?
Yeah, and all the things that went into the Event Horizon as well. The way we talked about how it looked kind of gothic on the inside, and you see like there's like weird spikes on the outside of the ship. There's so much that goes into that design work that really brings out the horror elements of the film. So I think all of that really adds to it.
Yeah, there's something about the front design as well that really reminded me of one of my other great sci-fi TV loves, which is Babylon 5. They also have a ship there, I think it's called the Dreadnought, that has like they're long and thin and have like a big face, which is what the Event Horizon has. Like you said, the Event Horizon is very gothic, and the face almost kind of looks like a skull, doesn't it? Whereas that's not the vibe in Babylon 5, because it's not a horror show, but it's a similar kind of design, and I just love watching anything that reminds me of Babylon 5 because it makes me happy.
Okay, that might swing your vote a little bit, I'm guessing. But the last one in this category for best spacecraft is the Icarus II from Sunshine. So this ship, again, it looked great, didn't it? It had the big sort of sun reflector on the back of it. It looked like a weird sort of satellite, the way it's sort of all put together. But it really made some great visuals, because there's that moment when the captain's on top of the ship, and then the sun's coming to get him. And all of that reflection and the way it's stylized, it really sort of made it really effective.
Yeah, it's another one where it's really iconic, it's unique, and the design of the ship feeds into the plot, similar to the Event Horizon, like you said. I think even more so than the Event Horizon, because you know what you're saying about how the design of the Event Horizon feeds into the mood and feel of the movie. They literally build set pieces and plot points out of the design and shape of the Icarus II. You've got that little room at the front of the sun dome where people just sit and stare at the sun and go completely insane over months at a time. It's a key part of the story of the film, is the shape and design of the ship they're on.
And also when they look at the bomb that they're carrying, they say it's massive, isn't it? It's the size of a city or something ridiculous. And the whole aesthetics of that as well are really fascinating, because towards that end scene of Sunshine, when they're running around and all the sort of like the weird spatial displacement that's happening in the shots, it really adds to that sense of weirdness as it sort of like draws to a close, that film, and sort of reaches its climax.
Yeah, they have that great tense moment in the heart of the bomb of the ship, which has been like this Chekhov's gun throughout the whole film. They're just dragging a bomb through space behind them, and you know that bomb's got to be detonated at the end of this film, because that's the best way to end it. So what's your vote on this one, James? I'm torn.
I think just talking about the Icarus II now has really swayed that as the winner for me, because just all of the style elements and how important they are to that ship and to the film really make it the winner in my eyes.
Same for me. The way it ties into the plot and the way they use the design of the ship to tell the story, it's amazing. You know, I was really tempted to go with Aniara because of the creative use of sets and low budget sci-fi. But if we're actually talking about the best spacecraft, which is what we want to give the prize to, yeah, I got to agree, it's got to be the Icarus II.
Okay, so congratulations, Icarus II. You are the best spacecraft.
Danny Boyle wants to stop by the podcast. He's welcome to anytime.
16 months ago, I, Robert Capa, and a crew of 7 left Earth frozen in a solar winter. Our payload, a stellar bomb with a mass equivalent to Manhattan Island. Our purpose, to create a star within a star.
So next up is Scariest Moment in Space. So what are the nominees for this category then, Matt?
So first up, it's Event Horizon, with all the visions of hell that they're seeing in space. Second, we've got Gravity, the opening scene where the space debris is just destroying everything. Third is Sunshine, the airlock scene where they've got to get from one ship to the other through the vacuum of space. Fourth is Europa Report, which has got 2 really amazing, scary moments. We get a character falling through the ice on the moon and just drifting slowly into nothingness. And we also get another character drifting slowly into nothingness as they're lost into space and can't get back to the ship that's just seemingly slowly drifting away. And then finally, we've got The Martian. There's a lot of tense moments in this film, but the one we're going with is when he's blown out of the airlock and he's got to gaffer tape his helmet back together, as well as get back into the hab and get to safety.
Yeah, a lot of tense moments in that list. I'm feeling a little bit anxious just thinking about some of those moments again, actually.
So this one's less anxiety-inducing, the first one, I think. It's more, like we said, a gothic type of horror. The visions from hell in the Event Horizon.
Yeah, there's some really disturbing, images in that whole scene. And I remember I think it's more the bit where they have those flashes of what was happening on the ship before they got there. And there's just people with their eyes gouged out and people killing each other. And it looks like some sort of weird blood orgy or something. It's all just, it's quite a lot to view in one go. Hence why it's such a quick cut sequence.
Yeah, it's conceptually very horrible, but I remember when we talked about it with Mike, maybe we're all just a bit desensitized to horror now, but it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't as scary as it was in my memory. I really, when I watched that film as a kid, it stuck in my head about how horrible these visions were, and I was a little bit surprised by how it's there's some dead people floating around and a blood orgy, no big deal.
Yeah, I completely see your point, and if we're talking scariest moments in space, that's kind of just a scary moment in itself. It doesn't really play on the fact that they're in space. And I think in the next one, Gravity, the whole scene with the space debris really sort of brings out the horror of space in that particular film.
It's a true disaster happening in space, and it's what real life astronauts must be terrified of. Between moments of sheer wonder, it must pop into their heads. It's also so important for the pace of the film, because we have this huge catastrophe set piece that sets up the plot, but that debris that's just orbiting Earth is the constant menace from the film. You know it's going to come back round because that's the only thing it can do, and she's just racing against the clock to get to safety before it happens again.
And it's how quick that debris can just make everything go to shit. That moment where one of her colleagues gets a bit of debris through his helmet and you just see it in the back of the shot, but it's so quick, but it just shows how any second something could go wrong, and then suddenly, you don't know how you're going to get out of this situation. So next up, we had another great space horror moment, the airlock scene in Sunshine. So what did you think about this particular moment then, Matt?
It's the most memorable part of the film. I'd forgotten so much of the film, but that airlock scene, it sticks in your head. We've just talked about Event Horizon. That had a kind of slightly worse airlock scene where they basically do the same thing, jumping from ship to ship. But in Sunshine, it's this perfect moment of Danny Boyle tense set piece where you just don't know what's going to happen. So they haven't got enough spacesuits, and they've got to drag one of their crewmates across, just wrapped up in like space blankets or whatever. And you kind of know as soon as it's starting that like this isn't going to end well for all of these characters. It's too high stakes as it is, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it does just kind of play out in that horribly predictable way, right?
Yeah, because one of the astronauts loses grip, doesn't he, or something? Gets hit by a bit of the floating debris, and then he's just drifting, and you know that's it for him. He can't get back now. There's nothing left he can do.
And we see him freeze up and his eyes kind of solidify.
Oh, it's horrible. But that is it's along a similar lines to what happens in Europa Report with the moment where he's drifting slowly into space. And that sort of acceptance of there's nothing I can do now. I can't get back to the ship. This is it for me. And I think that moment has more impact to it than the airlock scene, because he's saying to the rest of his crewmates, look, it's okay. I get it. There's nothing you can do. And the horror of that was more powerful for me, I think.
And we've seen it in a few films this series as well, haven't we? It's a threat in Gravity, and it almost happens to Sandra Bullock's character at the start of Gravity. It's a threat in Destination Moon, where we have to go and, as we mentioned earlier, go and rescue someone, not with shotgun propellant, but they use a fire extinguisher like WALL-E. But Europa Report does that the best out of those films because the character actually dies. It's used in other films as a threat that a character is rescued from. But we see the fear of that danger being completely realized slowly and horrifyingly. As you said, the character is aware of what's happening and in contact with the ship.
So that moment's really nicely juxtaposed with the other terrifying moment in Europa Report, which I felt like we had to mention as well, because it is another scary moment in the film. The moment where she's falling through the ice on the planet, and she just keeps drifting further and further down. And again, it's that feeling of not being able to get back to where you're supposed to be, and you're just drifting further and further away. So both of those scenes have that kind of scare to them, that horror.
And then finally, we've got The Martian. A little bit hard to pick the scariest moment in The Martian because it's got loads of tension, very similar to Gravity. Loads of moments where things seem like they're going to go completely wrong for Mark Watney. But for me, it was the scene that comes kind of out of the blue where the entire hab just explodes and he gets blasted away in an airlock. And it seems like he's got absolutely no hope. Like he's got no home to go back to, even on Mars, and he's stuck in a tiny little airlock, and he's got a crack in his helmet. And that moment sticks in my head so much, where he's got the gaffer tape and he's just trying to tape himself back together.
I think that's the bit that I really remember as well. The fact he's like grabbing that gaffer tape and will he get it on in time? And you see that crack in his helmet at first and you're like, what the hell can he do? How can he get out of this situation? So thank goodness for gaffer tape saving the day in that film.
So what's your vote going to for the scariest moment in space, James?
I think for me, it's got to be Europa Report, just because that image of him drifting slowly into space and knowing he can't do anything about it, that's truly terrifying for me.
I completely agree. I think that we've talked about it a lot, that it's quite hard to conceptualize what's so scary about space, but it is just this idea that it's a vast nothingness that you might be sucked out into forever and just lose yourself. And Europa Report really does that the best, with Sharlto Copley's character having him just being blown out of the airlock and just having a few moments to come to terms with his own death right there and then.
Yeah, so I think that is exactly the reason why Europa Report wins scariest moment in space.
James?
Yeah, I'm here. Christ, I'm gone. Oh, shit.
So our next category is Best Space Captain. Who are the captains that led us in the most interesting ways, James?
So first up in the nominees is Chefon from Aniara. Then we've got Captain Miller from Event Horizon. Then we've got Jack O'Neill from Stargate. Jim Lovell from Apollo 13. and Monty from High Life.
So what do we think of these captains of space? It's interesting that you've put Chiffon from Aniara at the start.
Yeah.
Why did you pick him from nomination?
I think he goes through such a lot of shit in that film. He's got an impossible situation, and he has to basically captain a ship that has nowhere to go. And he ends up sort of like, it's almost more like he's a prime minister or something like that on that ship. So he's more than the captain. And he just goes through so much just trying to keep things together. So I feel like he has to be one of the best space captains.
He's a really interesting character for sure. He's really conflicted, and he does some things that are quite unpleasant. But you're right, he's thrust into a situation that he never really wanted. He was expecting a 3-week flight to Mars, and it seemed all fairly simple. He wasn't expecting to go off the grid for 6 million years.
Yeah, and to be fair, he's probably not the best captain in terms of leadership. He does get a few things wrong during the film, but he's trying his best. And like you said, it's an impossible situation, isn't it?
So next we've got Captain Miller from Event Horizon, played by Lawrence Fishburne. He's awesome in that film, isn't he? Pure Morpheus energy in 2 years before The Matrix came out.
Yeah, he's just really heroic. He's just getting the job done. He's not messing about. There's lots of weird shit going on, but he takes it all in his stride. He's definitely one of the most composed space captains I think we've seen throughout the series.
And he basically ends the film in like a fist fight with a demonic Sam Neill. It's pretty cool. It's as cool as that sounds. I just made it sound pretty cool, and it is.
I mean, that's got to win him extra points, surely. So next up, we've got Jack O'Neill from Stargate. So Jack O'Neill, played by Kurt Russell, the icon that is Kurt Russell. Even with his weird shaved military hair in this, he's still the guy. He's got a few problems. He's dealing with some issues because of his son's recent death, but he still keeps it together in this film and manages to take on an entire alien race that have enslaved loads of people.
Yeah, it's a great performance from Kurt Russell. Like you said, he's really iconic, especially at that point in his career as well. It was after his biggest successes, and he's playing a character who is coming back to something as this heroic figure, but he brings with it quite a lot of darkness, lost his son, and he's not really fit for the job. I remember when we talked about it, he seemed like a weird choice to maybe send through this wormhole, but like you said, he's the guy. They need Jack. It creates a mythology around him where you're in no doubt that despite what he's been through and despite where his head's at, everyone's like, well, we've discovered a wormhole. There's only one guy we're going to send through this. It's Jack O'Neill. So next up, we've got Jim Lovell from Apollo 13, our only real character.
Yeah, he's a real guy. He literally did all of the things in Apollo 13. So, I mean, so even if he doesn't win this category, he's still the best space captain out of these fictitious characters.
And he's got to hold things together. There's the best moments in Apollo 13 are after everything's gone just completely to shit, and he has that vision of being on the moon, of what could have happened as they're passing the moon, and then he comes out of that, and I can't remember how he phrases it, but he says something like, "Do you guys want to go home?" And they're all like, "Yeah, of course we do." He's like, "Well, let's get on with it. We're gonna go home. Pull your thumbs out, guys. It's time to be serious."
Yeah, he has that real motivational moment, doesn't he? And he's very sort of down the line. We've got to get it done. We've got no other option. We're going to do it. And that's part of the reason that they make it back in the first place.
Yeah, he's very heroic. And Apollo 13 also does a great job of making everyone heroes in that film. Like we talked about when we talked about it, the heroes on Earth are a major focus. You've got your steely-eyed missile men on Earth who are the engineers who are making it all happen. You've got the guy who couldn't make the trip because he had a cold or whatever, and he's got to do all the simulations on Earth, and everyone just comes together in such a great way. And Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell, he just like represents all of those people as the main character of the film. And, who else but Hanks could shoulder that kind of emotional heft of being the nicest guy in a group of incredibly nice guys.
Yeah, it had to be Tom Hanks for that role, didn't it?
And then finally, we've got Monty from High Life, the kind of weird loner on board the cell block, raising his daughter in the middle of nowhere in space.
Yeah, and technically he's not the space captain for a lot of the film and all the flashbacks, but by the end of it, he is the guy who is running the ship. So I think he gets promoted to captain by the end of it.
Everyone else is dead. He's the de facto leader of the ship.
Yeah, he's the next space captain by proxy. So he's having to sort of repurpose things in this spacecraft. He's trying to make do. He's trying to raise his daughter at the same time. He's taking on a lot of responsibility, probably more responsibility than some space captains, because he's having to do all of that. He's having to look after a young child. He's having to fix the ship. He's having to sort of potentially stay on mission, even though their mission's a bit sort of up in the air as to whether it's actually happening. But yes, he's got a lot on his plate.
I think similar to Chiffon in Aniara, he's very flawed, and he goes on an incredible character arc. And more so than Aniara, he is redeemed by his actions. You know, he's a con, he's a criminal. I think, you know, we find out his crimes were committed when he was quite young. So he's been in the system, the juvenile detention system, and then prison most of his life. And then through this baby and this journey, I feel like he is quite well redeemed. And that's a really interesting character arc to watch in that film, that otherwise horribly depressing film.
But on a more positive note, who should we award Best Space Captain to?
So I'm really struggling with this one. My instinct is telling me it's got to be Jack O'Neill, because he's the guy. Ooh. But it feels wrong to not award this to Jim Lovell, a real, genuine heroic space captain.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think because I love the character arcs of Chiffon and Monty, I really love them as space captains. But then if we're looking at space captains who are proficient and know what they're doing and are no nonsense, they are going to make a successful mission happen, then I would say it's Jim Lovell, because he's the guy. As much as Captain Miller in Event Horizon has that epic showdown, he's not dealing with the same pressure of having like a tinfoil sheet keeping you between you and outer space, and then having to get back and all of these weird things they have to do to make sure the ship still runs and is able to get back to Earth. I think Jim Lovell has it for me.
Yeah, me too. And the fact he really did it, he's a real guy. He's a real hero.
Yeah, so Jim Lovell, you are the best space captain in our books.
35 seconds to entry interface.
Gentlemen, it's been a privilege flying with you.
So next up, we have best visuals. So what film had the best visuals of the series?
So first up, we've got Interstellar, which showed us multiple different planets with different effects of time and space, a wormhole, and then ended up in like a 5-dimensional weird space interstellar world. Second, we've got The Fountain, which showed us nebulas in space through the use of microphotography. Third, we've got the sun itself in Sunshine, the overbearing, looming presence of the approaching sun. Fourth, we've got Solaris with its interesting color palette and depiction of life on this decaying space station. And then finally, we've got The Martian with those gorgeous landscapes created by Ridley Scott to represent the planet of Mars, just using shots on Earth.
Yeah, so that's a strong group of nominees right there. So let's start talking about Interstellar then. So the different planets that Christopher Nolan depicts in this, they're all really inventive in terms, like you had the one which is just made of water, and then the weird time thing that's happening on there, and that vision of the big tidal wave coming to get them is really impressive. You also have the other ones where it's like the ice planet, and yeah, there's so much to this film and the way it looks, and having the sort of the vision of Earth as well with all the dust storms and things like that. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of stuff to absorb.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a wild roller coaster of a film. And then it ends up in the inside of the bookshelf, where it's actually the other side of time and space as we know it, inside the black hole. That's really great as well. You know, it's a really creative depiction of the center of a black hole and the effect that it would have on time and space.
Yeah, I think all of those elements really make it a great visual film. But I think, for me, the next one is definitely up there. So The Fountain, with its use of microphotography, and I think it's got pictures of cells and stuff like that. And it just looked gorgeous. The whole thing looked amazing. And I know how much we were gushing about all of the different visuals when we were talking about that particular film.
Yeah, I think it's Aronofsky's best visual film. He's a really good director and a really interesting director, but he also does a lot of quite naturalistic stuff. Like The Wrestler is more about camera work and character. This is him going just all out crazy and just having completely free license to really create something unique in terms of the visuals. It's such a personal and like internal feelings plot that it's so interesting to depict space as actually photographs and video of tiny microorganisms and stuff like that. It's a really interesting way of depicting things, and you don't really realize it when you're looking at it. It's just a cool swirling mass of space that makes it feel very strange and alien, even though it's just space.
Yeah, and the weird sort of like the way they weave all of the mythology in there about the fountain, and the way that they show the history parts of it, like the Mayan civilization, and all of that, I think, really contribute to this great, just like lots of great imagery, because you've got the different time periods, you've got the way that space looks, you've got the spacecraft itself. It's all in there in the fountain.
So what about the sun itself as depicted in Danny Boyle's Sunshine? It's basically a character in the film, isn't it?
Yeah, it's this weird threat that's constantly looming over them, yet it looks gorgeous. It's like a bright... It's the brightest thing that is in the solar system. And it's kind of like this weird positioning where it's something that everyone's in awe of, yet it's also a menace in the film. And I think that kind of balances out.
Yeah, the film has to deal with the pressures between the fact that the sun is the thing that provides all life on Earth, but it's also incredibly dangerous, the mission that they're going on. So they have to figure out these interesting ways in the film of showing that these characters have that danger, that they are afraid of it because it is dangerous, but you get these characters who are becoming obsessed with it in a really strange, almost religiously fanatical way of just wanting to sit there and stare at it until their skin is just burning and flaking.
It's down to the visuals in that all of that succeeds, because if the special effects on how they make the sun look hadn't been as good as they were, you wouldn't have been able to get all of that across.
Yeah, and also the sun meeting the reflective dome on the front of the ship and everything they do with that. It must have been so hard to work out in terms of the production of it. Similar to The Fountain, just making space, empty space, look so interesting and beautiful. It must be quite hard to just make the sun, which is so bright and would take over any, visual element of anything, to use the golds contrasted against the blacks and do something really interesting with it without losing any focus of what's going on.
Speaking of losing focus of what's going on, the next one in the nominee, Solaris, that was a confusing film, but I loved the color palette in that. So like, I know I was talking a lot about that when we were going into our in-depth discussion about that on the podcast, but it's sort of like the greens and the way they sort of go into black and white every once in a while, and sort of all of these weird things that really bring out the sort of visuals and what's going on. And for a film of its time period as well, the way all of that comes across, it just really like gets you into the sort of like into the mood of the film. And I know for me in particular, it really sort of like dragged me along, the way you sort of get sucked in by the visuals and the way that the audio comes in and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and contrasting those visuals of the planet and the visions they're getting, contrasting that against the kind of oppressive grey misery on the station itself. The station is like falling apart and it's a really unpleasant place to be. And it's done in quite a plain, everything's quite grey or maroon. And that's kind of balancing against the lushness of Earth that we see at the start of the film, and also the vividness of every time we see anything going on the swirling oceans of Solaris.
And I feel like Solaris has given a lot to other films, because something like Aniara, the sort of colour work in that, and the way that when they're using the Mima machine, you see like the green grass of Earth and all that kind of stuff, and then it goes back to being on the coldness of the ship. And I feel like Solaris really brought a lot of that to sci-fi cinema.
And then finally we've got The Martian. It looks like a Ridley Scott film. Ridley Scott films always look great. He's created Mars just by using deserts and stuff on Earth. And we also talked about how we saw the pictures of the actual Martian landscape, and he was quite accurate in what he'd done. He'd made it even more vivid and even more, red and dusty, but it was quite a good depiction of the Martian landscape.
Yeah, definitely. And it was totally believable as well. Like you said, the way that he's put it all together, you forget that this is all it's all a film. It's not actual footage of Matt Damon on Mars. Sometimes you really get that sense of, okay, so this is what Mars is like. This is really happening. It's got that real realism to it.
And some of those shots that contrast how wide and huge and open that space is, and you have him just sitting there in his little suit in the middle of the shot, it just looks incredible, and it really draws that sense of isolation into focus for the audience. It's amazing.
So who do we think is the winner of Best Visuals then?
So for me, I think it's Sunshine, but I don't know. I think I really love The Fountain as well. What's your choice?
So obviously I really like Solaris for all that it's done for sci-fi cinema since. The Fountain looks gorgeous, but I think if we're talking best visuals in a space film, I think Sunshine's got to take it, because it is the most authentically space film in that list, I would say, because it's all about space travel. It's all about them traveling to the sun. So yeah, so I think for me, Sunshine has to win it.
Agreed. Well done, Sunshine. Once again, another win.
At this distance of 36 million miles, you are observing the sun at 2% of full brightness.
2%? Can you show me 4%?
4% would result in irreversible damage to your retinas.
So our next award is for the Hero of Exploration in Space. Who are our nominees for this one, James?
So our nominees for Hero of Exploration are Mark Watney from The Martian, Helios from Frau im Mond, Joe Sweeney from Destination Moon, Robert Capa from Sunshine, and Jim Lovell, yet again, from Apollo 13.
So Mark Watney, he's stranded on Mars, and like we said earlier, he brings agriculture to the barren wasteland of Mars. What does he call himself? A space pirate, or he's technically a pirate because he's in unclaimed territory?
He gives himself a really funny name as well, doesn't he? But I've forgotten what it is.
Blondebeard?
Blondebeard, yes. That was it. Good old Blondebeard. So yeah, I think Mark Watney's definitely up there in this category, because he is there for such a long time as well. And I don't think anyone else had the sort of longevity that Mark Watney gives to his mission. And I mean, he doesn't have a choice. He has to be there because he's stranded. But he becomes a hero by all of the things that he does. Like you said, the agriculture element and sort of the ingenious ways that he makes contact with Earth again, and all these little things that he's doing in order to sort of really become more of a heroic character.
And then we've got Helios from way back in episode 2 in Frau im Mond.
So Helios, I think he should be in this category because he helps the Doctor to go to space, basically, because no one's backing him. No one believes that there's gold on the moon, so no one is sort of funding his mission. But Helios says, no, we're going to go to the moon. I'll go with you. And he's really sort of like helping his friend out. And he gets there and he says, like, I'm going to stay on the moon, a very heroic gesture because there's not enough fuel for them all to get back. So I think that's the definition of a hero.
He is very heroic and noble, isn't he? Almost to a point of like, I can't handle this guy. I think maybe by modern cinema expectations, he's just so perfect and so dreamy and wonderful that he was kind of winding me up a little bit.
He does get a little bit whiny as well, though. He's really obsessed with the girl in the film as well, isn't he? So he's kind of like, he's drawn in that weird love triangle, which kind of takes away from his heroism a little bit, because is he just doing it to get the girl?
Interesting. Anyway, someone who is more down to earth while he's being blasted off into space is Joe Sweeney from Destination Moon. We loved him when we were watching that film. He's like the voice of the audience. He's asking all the dumb guy questions about how space travel works. He doesn't even want to go into space because he thinks it's a complete suicide mission. But he kind of like holds the crew together, right? By just being like a nice, good guy. And he's comic relief, which is always fun.
Yeah, he's just a normal guy who just happens to be on this weird space mission. He didn't even really volunteer. They just said, oh, we need somebody else. So they were like, oh, Joe, you come. He didn't believe in the mission, but he got like swept away into it. And then by the end of it, he's like, right, I'll volunteer to stay behind again. Again, similar to Frau Mond. But everyone's like, no, Joe, you've got to come with us. Because he's one of the most likable characters in that film as well. So maybe not the typical definition of a hero of exploration, but I think Joe should definitely be in this category because he's so likable and he is sort of like a hero of the people. He's the people's champion in that film.
Then we've got Robert Capa, who is the main character, Cillian Murphy's character in Sunshine. Now, he really, he goes through a lot, and he's also a really flawed guy. A lot of the people on the ship don't really like him that much, but he is committed to the mission, and he's the one who, as we said before, he sees it through to the end. He's riding that bomb into the sun like Dr. Strangelove. He's the one who sees everything through to the very end.
Yeah, and it's his theories and stuff that lead the mission in the first place. So he's come up with all these. He's figured out how to reignite the sun and save the planet. So again, a very heroic thing to be doing. He's saving the planet by being part of this space mission.
And then lastly, once again, we've got our real life hero, our beloved space captain, Jim Lovell from Apollo 13. He's, as we said before, he did all this for real. He was up there in space. He went around the moon, but he never actually went on the moon, did he?
No, that's true. But he discovered, because of that mission, they discovered a lot more about how to go into space and then what could potentially go wrong. So they learned stuff. So in that sense, he was like a hero of exploration because by doing this, by going on this mission, people found out more about things that could go wrong.
So who's your pick then for the hero of exploration?
For me, it's Mark Watney.
No debate needed, James. I 100% agree with you. We love Mark Watney. I love Jim Lovell slightly more because he's real, but he's already been our best captain. And Mark Watney was out there on Mars exploring it for, like a year in the film? It's great.
I feel like Mark Watney as well is a combination of a bunch of these characters. So he's got the comic relief of Joe Sweeney. He's got the intelligence of someone like Robert Capa. He's got the sort of natural leadership of someone like Jim Lovell. He hasn't got any of the traits that Helios has, but Helios doesn't have that many traits. So I think Mark Watney is really sort of like the standout guy. He is the culmination of what a hero of exploration should be.
You're absolutely right, yeah. He's iconic. We love Mark.
They say that once you grow crops somewhere, you've officially colonized it. So, technically, I colonized Mars. In your face, Neil Armstrong.
So our penultimate category in our Space Awards episode is Most Innovative Space Travel.
Yep, so the first nomination for this is Stargate. It's the wormholes built out of an ancient ring device found in the ground. Then we've got The Wandering Earth, where we dragged the entire planet, 4.5 light years across the galaxy, and we're just going to plop it down somewhere else after several generations. Then we've got The Fountain, the weird, orb that the astronaut character played by Hugh Jackman pilots into the Xibalba Nebula, carrying inside it nothing but himself and a tree and its roots. Then we've got more wormholes. It's the wormhole from Contact that took us the furthest distance we've seen in this series into the center of the Milky Way galaxy, so Jodie Foster could meet an alien that looks like her dad. And then finally we've got Apollo 13, where we see a real-life story of astronauts and engineers on the ground just having to rig things together on the fly using their sheer innovation skills, I guess, and just working it out.
Yes, there's a lot to digest in this category. So first up, let's talk a little bit about Stargate. So the Stargate which they found in Egypt, they unearthed it, and it's just the visuals of that again are really great, and it is very innovative. The way that the wormhole it's a wormhole, isn't it, that they've got in that Stargate?
Yeah, so the idea is that each ring, there's hundreds or countless, or we don't really know in the film, but loads of these rings, and they can all dial into each other, and when that dial in is locked, then it generates a wormhole between the two. It's a great idea. I think we talked about it when we did the episode, but the mere fact that SG-1 ran for 10 or 11 seasons, and then there's like 3 more series after that, that's because it's such a great, innovative idea. There's so much potential for stories in that.
Yeah, and the idea that you can just dial into a different planet and then get sent over there is brilliant. And the way that the wormhole looks, the way it's the sort of like the weird liquid stuff projects out of it, and then it's like a weird sort of watery mirror. And yeah, everything about that is very innovative.
So next up, we've got The Wandering Earth, which was, we both agreed, completely crazy, right?
Absolutely mad.
So they blast the entire planet off into space by building... How do they do it? They build engines across the equator. Some of them are to propel, and some of them are to stop and adjust rotation so they can break out of orbit. And then they've got a ship that like leads the way as they are slowly trudging through the solar system.
Yeah, it's an absolutely bonkers idea, and I think we used the word bonkers a lot when we were talking about that film. But yeah, the idea that you're just propelling the Earth with a bunch of booster rockets is just, it's crazy, but I really like it. It's so imaginative.
It works so well in that film, even though it shouldn't. So then we've got the fountain, the iconic clear orb that Hugh Jackman is just meditating in like a monk and floating in the center of, accompanied by a tree that he talks to as if it's his wife. It's another one that's pretty crazy, but I actually thought it made a lot more sense than The Wandering Earth.
So yes, the orb in the fountain, it looked great, and it's not your typical device for space travel, is it? It's not, because we've seen like wormholes in Stargate, we've seen wormholes in Contact, but traveling around in a weird orb that can just propel itself wherever it wants to go. The closest thing we saw was in Explorers, where they use a similar sort of technology, but it definitely didn't look as good as it does in the fountain with that tree and the sort of golden nature of the orb. It's just, yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and it works so well in the film because we don't learn anything really about how the orb spacecraft works. But as we learn more about the plot, we understand that it's taking place in such a distant future because of this revelation of the fountain of youth that's keeping people alive. We don't know how far in the future it's taking place. So it's presenting us this idea of technology that's just become so advanced that you get a sense through that of just how much time has passed in the plot of the movie, that this kind of technology has come to bear in that time, this pure orb that can be safely blasted through space.
And speaking of sort of like technologies and things like that, the technology in Contact is really good. So that's something which has come from aliens, has been beamed down to us. We've deciphered the message. But again, the way that they've worked out how that wormhole works and the sort of time difference that happens when Jodie Foster goes off into this wormhole. She's gone for ages, but it seems like a few seconds to everybody else. They don't even notice that she's gone. all of that contributed to it being a really fascinating way of traveling through space.
Yeah, and I love the idea of everyone in the world coming together to work on this project and no one really understanding how it works. It's just like we've got these blueprints and we've got faith that it will work and we're just going to build this machine and hope for the best because we've got faith in it.
And then finally, we've got Apollo 13. So Apollo 13 was all about innovation, wasn't it? Because so many things go wrong during that space mission that the people on the ground, the people in the actual on Apollo 13 are constantly trying to work out and troubleshoot different ways to keep things running.
Yeah, and we talked about how The Martian is like a kind of fictionalized love letter to the kind of people that are celebrated in Apollo 13. It is the same kind of vibe where we're talking about people who work in NASA who achieved such incredible things in like the 50s, 60s, 70s and, you know, and beyond to do incredible things in space and save these three men that by all rights, when things start to go wrong in Apollo 13, you're not expecting them to go well again.
So who's got your vote then, Matt? Who wins most innovative space travel?
I've got to give it to the Wandering Earth. They drag the planet through space. What about you?
I mean, yeah, just the visual of that is great. And I'm just thinking about it now, it is innovative. Like, I've not seen a film, because we've seen wormholes. We see them in Stargate. We see them in Contact. We've seen the Orb spaceship in Explorers and the Fountain. I've never seen anything like The Wandering Earth.
All countries and regions around the world will mobilize all resources to construct 10,000
建造1万座行星发动机。
So our final category, of course, we have to pick the best space film that we've watched this series. What are our contenders?
So our contenders for best space film are Gravity, The Martian, Interstellar, Moon, and Contact.
Let's just go straight into it, James. What's your favourite space film?
Oh, these are all great. This is really difficult. They're so good. I've enjoyed each of these episodes talking about these particular films. And I think it's interesting that Gravity and The Martian were on one episode. So I think that might be an indicator there as to two of the lead ones for me.
That was my favourite episode to record when we looked at Gravity and The Martian, and I think I enjoyed them the most. And I went into this episode pretty sure that The Martian is my favourite film of this series. But you know what? Looking at this list, the only one of these films that I hadn't seen before is Contact, and I had a bit of a view of Contact, and I thought it was going to be kind of boring. And I was really blown away by how good it was. For that reason, I think I'm leaning more towards Contact. It was such a good experience for me to watch that for the first time and then talk to you about it. And even just now talking about the innovative space travel in it just reminded me how much I loved it and how cool it was.
Yeah, you see, I've got that for The Martian because it was the first time that I'd watched The Martian when doing this series. So, it's tricky, isn't it? Those are the two front runners, I think.
Well, that's a great reason for both of us. I think we can have a joint win on this one.
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, the others are all really great as well. Interstellar's brilliant, all of the fascinating concepts in that. Moon's a great, beautifully made indie sci-fi. Gravity is just so intense. But I think there's something about The Martian and Contact which just really sort of like speak to me.
So I think it's a tie for those two then, The Martian and Contact, a couple of absolutely great films.
Definitely. Worthy winners, worthy joint winners to be sure.
No words to describe poetry. I should have said a poem. So beautiful. Beautiful.
They're only doing that in the hopes that I won't raise any objections to this lunacy. Because I like the way Fastest Man in the History of Space Travel sounds. I do like the way it sounds. I mean, I like it a lot.
So James, let's talk about some of the honourable mentions, some of the films that we didn't quite have time to cover or we couldn't really fit into one of the themes that we wanted to talk about. I know you've got a few that you wanted to give a bit of a shout out to?
Yeah, so first up, one of the honourable mentions I wanted to talk about was Capricorn 1. So I think I mentioned about this briefly earlier on in the series, but basically it's a film about faking a space mission. So it's a film from 1977, and I think it's an important film, but it didn't quite fit into any of our categories this series. But I think it's definitely one to sort of like keep an eye out for. If you see it on any streaming services, give it a watch if you're after more sort of like space film material. It's a really sort of like, it's a fascinating little film.
I'll definitely try and check that one out. That sounds great. What else have we got?
So The Right Stuff, I think that's another great one to check out. It's from 1983. It was based on a book by Tom Wolfe. So it covers sort of like Chuck Yeager and him breaking the sound barrier, and also the Mercury 7 astronauts. So again, it's more of a sort of historical biopic kind of film. So it wasn't quite leaning on the sci-fi side of things. But again, if you're interested in space stuff, it's another really good one to look out for.
Yeah, that sounds really good. We didn't cover a lot of those. We didn't want to cover a lot of those fact-based stories. It was kind of hard to ignore Apollo 13, so we had to cover it. And it was well worth looking at, but we wanted to keep it to the more fiction stuff. Similar to that, you've added a film called Hidden Figures to this list, which I think sounds really interesting. I hadn't heard of it until you put it on this list. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so it did really well when it came out in 2016. It's basically the story of a team of female African-American mathematicians who serve a very vital role in NASA during its early years. So it's all about sort of like what they're contributing to the space program. So again, another fascinating film, real life stuff in there. And I think all of that stuff, because we're talking primarily about science fiction, but it's also interesting to see how science fiction elements work their way into the real world and how these sort of technological innovations have sort of come about. And I mean, when we've been talking throughout the series about space travel, we've always been, I think our minds have been a bit blown by how far things have moved along since the days of sort of like Méliès and things like that, and how close to reality some of these science fiction tropes and elements have been.
So a film that I really wanted to talk about, and we almost did do an episode on this, was Passengers from 2016, the Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence movie. I really wanted to do this, and you were a bit reluctant, and I hadn't actually seen the film when I was suggesting it, but I was aware of it, and it was like the plot description is like the perfect film for me, because I love arc ship concepts, and I love the idea of just being characters being like stuck in space and having to come to terms with things just on their own and just kind of like going crazy. I even, before I'd seen it, I had an idea for like a story that I wanted to write, and I told it to one of my friends, and they were like, "Oh mate, that's the plot of the film Passengers. You've just described the plot of the film Passengers." And I was gutted, and I finally got around to watching it, and I understood why you were reluctant to do an episode on it. I just found it really unpleasant, and I really disliked the main character, and I thought you were supposed to dislike him, and then by the end of the film he just kind of like gets away with everything. I don't know, it didn't feel right to do an episode on it because it's kind of a gross film, right?
Yeah, it's quite problematic, that film. I mean, I went into it the same way. I was sort of like quite looking forward to it. I really like the concept, but it does take a few twists and turns which don't quite fit with the themes and actually what's happening in the actual plot. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting watch, and I would say if you get a chance to watch it, give it a go, see what you think, because I think it definitely does cut people down the middle.
Yeah, and it has some incredible moments, and it's got a great first half, and there's an incredible scene with a zero-gravity swimming pool, which is one of the most interesting space set pieces I've seen. That was really cool. But yeah, too much of a problem with that one for me. What else have we got on the list then, James?
So two more recent ones on the list were First Man from 2018 and Lucy in the Sky from 2019. So both had big lead actors in. So First Man stars Ryan Gosling, and then Lucy in the Sky has Natalie Portman. So again, they were both films which were a bit sort of more closer to real life. hence why we kept them off of this series. So First Man deals with Neil Armstrong and his legendary space mission. So it goes into sort of like his life, and it's more of a biopic again. And then Lucy in the Sky looks at astronaut Lucy Kohler, and then sort of like how she returned to Earth after a transcendent experience on a space mission, and sort of her adjusting to being back in reality on Earth. So that was quite an interesting one. But there's been lots of films like that recently. Along a similar line, there was a film called Proxima, which came out in 2019 as well, which starred Eva Green. So again, it looked at sort of like an astronaut preparing for a mission, and all of sort of like the things that go into that. So there's been quite a few of these space mission films recently, which might be because they're ramping up for SpaceX, which has now happened, as we mentioned at the start of the show. So it might be that we'll see a resurgence in these kind of films. I mean, we talked about Ad Astra previously, didn't we, in one of our bonus episodes?
Yeah, that's a great space travel movie, and would have fitted well into this series. But obviously we covered that when it was brand new, so you can check that out if you want to look back through the archive. That was a pretty good film. We were both a bit unsure about it, weren't we? But I think I'd watch it again now.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience, Ad Astra. And again, another great film with space visuals and the way they show the planets and all that kind of stuff. It's a good watch. I did enjoy it.
So that brings us to the end of Series 2 of Journey Through Sci-Fi. We hope you've enjoyed coming with us on this journey through space. We're going to be taking a bit of a break before Series 3, but we'll be coming back to you with some new content in the future. We're actually a little bit unsure what we want to do. We've planned a few series in advance, but we can't really make our minds up. So we're going to put that decision up to you. So come and check us out on Twitter. We're going to put a poll up. We've whittled it down to 4 options. We're thinking either time travel, space opera, dystopia, or post-apocalyptic. And we're going to put that in your hands.
Yeah, they're all really strong categories for a new series. So I don't know which one you guys are going to pick, but I'd be excited to do any of those. I mean, we've got a lot of great films on our lists for those particular subgenres. So yeah, it'll be exciting to find out which one we end up going with.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And just a little peek behind the curtain. Obviously, we've rigged this vote somewhat because we've given you 4 options that we're really looking forward to talking about anyway. So we don't really mind which one wins.
Yeah, and if we don't cover one of those this time, we'll cover it next time. So we're definitely going to cover all of these subgenres at some point. But we'd be interested to find out which one you guys want to hear next, because that's what we're doing it for. We're doing it for you guys to listen to.
So in the meantime, get in touch with us. We'll still be on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram. You can drop us an email and leave us a review. And thank you very much to everyone who has reached out over the last 2 series to say hello, send us an email, or you've left us a review. We really do appreciate all of that. We're going to try and bring you some bonus content in the break. So stay tuned for that and stay subscribed, and that'll drop into your feed.
Yeah, so make sure you keep a lookout for those bits and pieces as they come out. Thank you all once again for listening, and we will see you next time.